This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are building the future. Hola, I am Joe Pardavila, and most acquisitions look good on paper. The real test begins after the deal closes. In his new book, G.A.L.E Force, J. Michael Coffey shares the lessons he learned helping HE Parts acquire 14 companies and expand into 7 countries. His framework is simple: global aim, local execution. Today, we're going to talk about culture, integration, and how companies create lasting value after an acquisition. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
Great. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
I'm glad you're here, even though I've come to find out you're a Buffalo Bills fan and I'm a Jets fan. But you know what? We're professionals. We're going to keep it professional. We're gonna make it just about the book and everything that's going on in your life. So we're going to keep sports
Absolutely.
out of it.
Yeah. I
But
mean,
again,
the good news is one of those teams is from New York.
that's true. Yeah. Well, technically both, but only one place in New York. But yes, understood. So Mike, I want to talk to you about, one of the things about M&A that I found fascinating as I've been on this planet for a long time. When I was a kid, it was always like the big guy gobbles up the small guy. Now that sort of has gone by the wayside where now the big guy is private equity. So it's multiple big guys swallowing up. Tell me about your path in this world. Did you see the same thing, this sort of conversion from, big to small to now PE acquiring companies? Tell me about what you've seen on the ground through the course of your career that led you to write Gale Force.
Yeah. Well, you're right. The observation is spot on, and I'll tell you how Gale Force came about. But it's the M&A world is incredibly diverse. I mean, is it public companies are engaged? Obviously, the big guys are still involved in acquiring business as part of their growth strategy. But private equity has transformed that part of the industry over the last 20, 30 years in pretty profound ways. And there's a new competitive pressure within private equity for different types of businesses at different phases. And some of these PE firms are specialized. They're looking for founder-led organizations where the founder wants to stay on. Some of them are looking for businesses that are ready to scale and they need capital infusion, and they have some speciality. What has changed dynamically is the presence of growth through mergers and acquisition as part of a strategic consideration, and that has really compounded over the last 30 years in pretty dramatic ways.
So in the book, you open up with this story in Chile, which, I didn't even know, like, domestic companies here or such were like doing anything in Chile. So give me a little background and tell me about what that learned and why that was so important to start the book that way.
Yeah. Well, so we started the book that way for a couple reasons. One, we had a David and Goliath type story with HE Parts. So our competitors were 120 to 180 times our size, and these are household names: Caterpillar, Komatsu, Metso, Sandvik, and we're building HE Parts, which hadn't been done before, acquiring small specialized businesses that are a fraction of the size and pulling them together to create a global alternative to the large OEMs. So mining is, most people are very comfortable and familiar with aeronautics. So mining has a similar function. When you board a plane, a lot of people don't realize that most planes, especially international planes, they're in the air 22 to 23 hours a day. They're always flying, always in operation. So utilization is absolutely critical. Mining operates to a similar degree because if you think about what's happening is many times you're taking 500 to 600 tons of material in order to get a workable pound or ounce of copper or gold. So the ratios are pretty dynamic. So you have to operate all the time. You have to be very, very efficient. And these mine sites never turn off. Chile's critical. Chile's critical to the world economy because they are the largest producer of copper. From head to toe, Chile is a haven of copper. Peru, Argentina, other countries in that region are also copper rich, but Chile's the leader. And when we built HE Parts, we started in North America. and we're acquiring businesses in North America, which was a great thesis. What we didn't realize is that the mining community would want us to be in 2 or 3 of their major markets in order to be significant to them. So, mining is an interesting industry. It's highly decentralized, and it happens in very remote locations around the world. You may remember this, Ice Road Trucker show.
Sure.
Okay, that road was built to a diamond mine that used to be it just closed last year, used to be run by Rio Tinto called Diavik. And so essentially that mine site had to get a year's worth of supplies in about 3 or 4 months when the ice was frozen. And that's the road that goes to that mine. It's a very remote location. Now, Rio Tinto is a global powerhouse, a great company. They're really well run, but their mine sites are all throughout the world, and each mine site has its own city mentality and has to be very decentralized. So to Rio Tinto, to engage with HE Parts at a serious level, they wanted to know that we were in several of their markets to become an approved supplier. And so it's an interesting dynamic. That's why we went to Chile. So when we built HE Parts, we were in Australia, Chile, Peru, Canada, the US, and Zambia before we sold that to Hitachi. The story in Chile is really interesting because we are a small, under-resourced comparatively to, say, Komatsu or Caterpillar
Sure.
alternative, and yet we had a unique value proposition to the mine site. We built the company that could move a little bit faster, be a little bit more responsive, build a little more value into our solutions to improve the probability of higher utilization and useful life. And the mine sites, because they're dealing with a duopoly, meaning that if they buy a $5 million mining asset, they can go to that OEM for a solution, but what happens if that OEM's solution isn't working for them? Where else do they go? And the whole idea, the whole thesis behind HE Parts was how do we build an alternative, not to replace the OEM, but to supplement what's going on and build value. Um, so that story in Chile is pretty critical because we ended up taking a prime position on a huge OEM contract, which no one expected us to win. And it kind of validated what we were working on for, a decade to build this company that would be credible enough and valuable enough for a global miner to say, yes, please rebuild half of our mining fleet for us and give it a second life. So I mean, when we won that contract, we were thrilled. It was like winning the lottery for us, and it really validated what we had been working on for so long.
It's interesting you make the reference of David and Goliath, and you don't think about it in literal terms, but in your case, it was you're small and agile, where
Yeah.
a lot of these other companies couldn't do that. Obviously, they could do at scale, but when it comes to that agility piece, they don't have that. And I have to pick this thread because I always love to learn more about little random things. You mentioned that the mining world is decentralized, so that immediately makes me think it's the Wild Wild West. Is is the world of mining the Wild Wild West?
No, not at all. It's amazing. I think it was. The answer is it certainly was.
Okay.
I mean, the most obvious cases go back to the birth of Levi jeans, where everyone was trying to stake a claim in California, and we didn't even have a state government in California. So yes, it was the Wild Wild West. Joe, I'm sorry, but that's my claim, and I pulled out a six shooter and let you know about it. Okay.
Right.
Um, that's a humorous way to say it. Today, mining is one of the safest, most professional, most environmentally compliant, especially the large public companies. They have too much at stake. Um, in many cases, they're working on mine plan development for 8 to 9 years before they start mining.
Mm.
So the amount of investment and amount of energy and thought that goes into how they're going to extract a mineral from a mountain is mammoth. And so it's very professional, and and a pleasure to work with them. Um, what's critical about the business is, even though the companies are global and the mineral rights are owned by, there's about 20 major mining companies that own most of the global mineral rights. It's highly centralized from an ownership standpoint, highly decentralized from an operating standpoint.
Gotcha.
That's why we had to be local. And so this idea of Gale Force is, global aim, local execution. It stems out of necessity of how HE parts had to function. So it was a balance between, we are a small technology company that had engineers in both Australia and North America, and we had operating outposts and service locations in Chile and Peru. And yet we are competing against these multinational mammoth public companies. So if we did not coordinate and cooperate at a higher level, our ability to compete was jeopardized, period. So we have this, before Gale Force existed, this was the phrase, uh, the strategy is global, the execution is local. So it necessitated that we had really well informed, very highly functioning, capable, smart local managers that understood the strategy exceptionally well and could move at a nimble pace to respond in the local market. And the reality is that we could solve problems in a very tailored way that an OEM may not be able to, because it would necessitate liability that could become a global liability for the whole corporation. So we would tailor a solution in northern Alberta where it's 50 below zero, and then adjust a solution on the same asset where um, it's 120 degrees at elevation, and tailor that to meet the client's demand. We could do that because we weren't accountable for the entire global installed base. We are accountable to the customer, and we had really good people that could move quickly. The customers, very often, they would ask us, why can't you do what Caterpillar does? Or why can't you do what Komatsu does? And well, the reality is that that's a different value proposition, and we were filling a different gap for the company. And what I would say invariably is, I said, well, I can appreciate where you're coming from, but I thought you were dissatisfied with a few things and you wanted to change a few things. And that's why we are here. So we are here to help you solve that problem. And eventually that would migrate into a positive discussion. And the strategy was global. We made sure our local management understood it, they spoke into it, and then they had principles that were unbreakable, but a lot of latitude with regard to how they were expected to execute on that strategy, and it worked. And so that became global aim, local execution, and it kind of, through bumps and bruises and mistakes, it uh, it baked into what the playbook that we have in Gale Force today. And I think it's an interesting thesis. Because these principles are pretty transferable, and they address something that is a nemesis right now to the fast-moving M&A world, and that's culture.
Yes, and actually that brings me to my next question in terms of, like, that fine line of global and local, because a global company will have their culture, and then the small company underneath will have their culture. So tell me how that works in practice, not in theory, in practice, when you have 2 cultures, and I don't mean sound overly dramatic, but culture clash. Because obviously a corporate culture may have a different culture than a local tiny town in Chile's, mining community. How do you thread that needle?
Well, let me tell you a humorous story where, at first, I didn't think there was a needle to be thread. I was pretty humble when we started buying these companies early on, but also perhaps confident to a overly confident extent. Um, well, we'll just go ahead and change things. And listen, the Chilean community, our management team there, and the people that are working in mining, they are the best of the best. They're highly educated. They're exceptional at what they do. And they were excited to work with a European or United States or Australian business and very deferential to what we were doing and what we wanted to do. But we're not going to change the Chilean culture. And that's a fallacy. I mean, I thought we would run the business in Chile the same way we would run a business in Australia or North America, and that is not true. And
Right.
that was a point of ignorance on my part, and I learned some funny lessons along the way. Um, the key is to find a way to nest a culture within a culture, and we call this the trifecta or the nesting of cultures within a culture. And you can do this, and it works in Italy, it works in Romania, it works in New Jersey, in Iowa. You don't disrespect what works historically within an acquired company. You understand it, and you look for points that are principled that align the business, and they vary. In HE Parts case, innovation was something that was baked into our DNA at everywhere in the world. As a matter of fact, our tagline was innovation, not duplication. And when you go to Chile, it's innovación, no duplicación. It's, it was everywhere because it was a principle that was baked into who we were, and it was a cultural value that we held very dearly. And we took it to the next level. If you were an employee at HE Parts, you were measured on your ability to innovate. What does that mean? How do you solve problems? Are you creative in your solving problems? You can do that from an accounting department. You can do that from a customer service department. You can do that in engineering. Most folks think that innovation is something that Elon Musk does and it stops there. It's not. It's the highest point of innovation is bringing a creative solution to resolve something that your customer, in this case, your customer is dealing with. And it was just baked into our culture. And the Chilean, it wasn't objectionable to who we were as Chilenos. It wasn't objectionable to who we were as Australians. It worked, right? So we embedded a culture within a culture to align the businesses, and then the things that were unique. We opened by sports team, and I learned this the hard way, but we had a great meeting scheduled with the largest copper mine in the world. The mine was called Escondida. It was owned by BHP. I thought we hit the jackpot. I mean, little HE Parts. We were going to get our first meeting with HE with BHP. Flew down. We were all prepped, ready to go. My team, we didn't know each other long enough. They didn't have the heart to tell me that when we arrived there, no one was there. The security guard was there. Every employee was gone because Chile had advanced to the Copa finals, and they were playing Peru, and which meant that no one was working.
Right.
you know, So it's like I'm not going to change that, right? I mean, that's a part of national pride, um, and so you can fight that. You can demand, uh, well, listen, we're here to work, and you will report to work. Or you can turn what looks like to be a headwind into a tailwind. And so we learned about this and said, well, you know what? Every time the Chilean national team advances, we're going to have a family barbecue at work, and we're going to celebrate it together and bring the families in, bring the customers in. And we turned what looks like an objection into something that built the business and made it stronger. Um, and that's what I mean by this idea of um, understanding the culture first, aligning uh, your core principles or your key values with your strategy, and then driving that embedded culture of the company within the business that you're working with. And the reality is it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be transcontinental or cross-cultural from a country standpoint. This principle will work if you buy a business in Iowa and you're based in New York, or vice versa. It's just a matter of respecting what the business was, what it brings to the table, and then making sure that the strategy and the principles align with both businesses going forward. I hope that makes sense, but that's
Yeah, no, it's good,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
funny because I love that story about the soccer team because my family's originally from Spain, and I know, we're actually recording this right as the World Cup is starting, so I know how in many of these cultures, everything stops, no matter unless it's like an emergency medical procedure, everything
yeah,
stops for this, and, one of the things that you talk about, and it's funny, in the M&A and P&A world, this, Michael, is the fact that most of it's on spreadsheets, right? It's all broken down into numbers and X's and O's and all of that stuff. But you make the case that culture can determine whether an acquisition succeeds or fails. Why do financial projections still receive so much more attention during the deal process? You just talked about everything you just talked about. Now, one point did you talk about money and budgets and P&L? It's been culture. Why do you think culture still
yeah.
gets pushed down during that deal process?
I think I think it's the missing part of the equation. It's getting more attention these days. There have been 5 or 6 major studies in the last 4 or 5 years, and by very reputable firms. McKinsey, PwC, Deloitte. They've all done studies on culture, and here's what they found: that within the deal process, during diligence, before you close, cultural issues rank between number 6 and number 7 of importance. Yet after close, it moves up to number 1, and the
Eh,
reason it moves up to number 1 is it's the single greatest objection with regard to post-merger integration,
And you could see
and
it too, right? Like, that's actually tangible at that point.
it yes, it's tangible. Now, there are ways to measure it, but the reason it doesn't garner, um the critical level of importance as, say, the balance sheet projections, financial returns, purchase price valuations, ROI. The reason it doesn't garner that attention is it's less tangible. It's harder to get the pulse of culture, and the reality is that these businesses are buying a company and paying a premium for a return, and so they're using measures that are very common to those equations. um, so I think what's happening is people are paying more and more attention to that as a driving factor, and thankfully they are. As many as 70% of deals fail to meet their financial objections, and that's validated by the big consulting firms, people like McKinsey. As a matter of fact, McKinsey is saying 70 to 85%. Now, it doesn't mean they're failures. It means they fail to meet the objectives. So they had a thesis, and there's a lot of reasons for this. One is I call it the hockey stick principle. When you receive a book to look at a business that is marketed by an investment bank, there's always a hockey stick of projections. Things have moved along at a pretty good state, and then, in the next 3 or 4 years, it's just going to
Upward.
take off, right?
Yep.
Well, e- people, I think, have learned to discount the hockey stick principle, but it's it's hard to assume the future results of what you're going to attain when you acquire a company. That is a heavy lift in and of itself. So that's part of the reason I think that um, the financial return, or perhaps the premium that was paid to buy the company, especially in tech companies, is not offset by the performance of the business. But what these studies have found is as many as half to 60% of these businesses are missing the mark due to executables. And a large factor there is, are they integrating these businesses well enough from a cultural standpoint? So the study that I mentioned to you before, when they're ranking 6 to 7, post close, culture goes up to number 1. And the idea behind Gale Force is How do we think about this upstream? Okay. It's never going to be perfect, but what can we do today during diligence to understand how these businesses are going to mesh? And how can we prepare the business before close, during the process, and post close to achieve the highest level of performance and return as possible? Um, and if your idea is to get 1x return in 2 years or 2x return in 3 years in an acquisition, and you come in at 80% of that, that may not be a failure. I mean, hopefully you're buying the company for a long-term strategic reason. Um, and so there's value to be obtained over the long haul. Um, but this idea it's garnering more and more attention. And the idea behind Gale Force is to come up with a three-part solution that will improve the probability of success up to the sale, and if you're acquiring a company, more importantly, post-close, when you're trying to get the integration work done.
Excellent. And lastly, you've seen both sides of the coin because HE Parts acquired 14 company, expanded into 7 countries before being acquired by Hitachi. What tell me about like the frickin' frack of it, like the acquirer to the acquiree. What was that like emotionally for you? Because I think a lot of people go through this as their companies grow. Sometimes they're acquiring, and then one day someone acquires them. Tell me about that sort of emotional roller coaster for you.
Well, the best way to tell you is when I resigned from Hitachi as CEO, or HE Parts working for Hitachi as CEO. That was one of the most difficult, bitter decisions I've ever made, and they did nothing wrong. Hitachi is a great owner of HE Parts. I was just coming to the realization that I didn't fit, and it would be better if Hitachi had found a new CEO, and they did, a great one, to lead the business through its next growth curve. But you become incredibly attached. I didn't found or build or start any of the businesses that made up HE Parts, but we became very attached to that business. And I mean, you just fall in love with the people and the strategy and the work, and we're really proud of the business. It's about 230 times larger than it was when I left. They're going through a CEO change right now, a gentleman that I respect dearly, and I'm very, very happy he's going to be leading the company starting this August. And you just become attached to the people, and I think owners go through the same dynamic. It's like, this is my baby. These people are my family. I feel rightly close to the customer base. It's a lifestyle career. All of these things are good scenarios that challenge the idea, is it time to sell? And by the way, the market is littered right now with private businesses, most of them lower middle market, that are at this stage. What's the right time? When should I sell? Um, do it, do, you know, my son or daughter, I was always hoping and dreaming that they would take an interest in this business, and they have other interests. And I'm closing in on 70. What do I do? And these are life dynamics, right? And so just because you acquired a bunch of businesses to sell to Hitachi in this particular case doesn't mean that you're exempt from the challenges, because it was really a very difficult decision. Thankfully, I'm still in touch with the business now, still engaged and have good relationships with the team at Hitachi. They're awesome people. Um, so it all worked out for the best. But anyone who tells you it's easy, you should have alarm bells, because um, it's not easy.
It's not easy, and you can read all about it in Gale Force, Navigating Strategy, Culture, and Value Creation in Modern M&A. He is J. Michael Coffey. Michael, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Michael and our other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.